The stroke took my right hand, and most of my walking, and the clean sound of my own voice. But it did not take the one thing the woman they hired to care for me assumed it had taken, which was my mind. Lorna looked at a 72-year-old man in a wheelchair who talked slow and crooked, and she decided, the way almost everyone decided, that the lights were off upstairs. So she stopped being careful around me. She made her phone calls about my money in my own living room, 6 feet from my chair, the way you'd talk in front of a dog. She told my daughter, on my own telephone, that Dad was declining and didn't really want visitors. She slid papers in front of my shaking hand and guided the pen, and the whole time, she had no idea, none, that the slow, crooked old man in the chair was an engineer who spent 40 years calculating exactly where a structure would fail before it failed, and that he was sitting there, perfectly clear, watching her build her whole little scheme on the one assumption that was wrong. I could not stop her with my body. That's the thing you have to understand about this story, and it's what makes it different from any fight I'd ever been in. I couldn't drive to a lawyer. I couldn't pick up a phone without her hearing. I couldn't stand up and put her out of my house. I was, for the first time in my life, completely dependent on the very person who was robbing me, trapped in a chair in my own home with my thief. So I did the only thing I had left, the thing she was absolutely certain I could no longer do. I thought, I planned, and I called for help, very, very quietly, one move at a time, in a way she never thought to watch. Because you do not guard against a man you've already decided isn't there. My name is Vernon Lund. Most people call me Vern. I am 72 years old, and I live in a small town on the coast of Maine, in the house my wife Cora and I bought 40 years ago. I was a structural engineer. I designed bridges and buildings, and the whole of my working life was the study of failure, of load and stress, and the exact hidden point where a strong-looking thing gives way. If you're listening tonight, maybe someone whose body has started to betray them, who's felt the terrible new way people talk to you and over you once you slow down. Then you understand the wound under this one before I even say it. Stay with me to the end and tell me down in the comments where you're listening from, because the most important move I ever made in my life, I made from a wheelchair, and I'd like you there when it lands. Let me start with the chess, because the chess is how I got out. For 50 years, my oldest friend Russ and I have played chess by mail. We met as young engineers, and when his work took him to the other side of the country, we kept a game going through the post. One move per letter. The slow way, the way they played it 100 years ago. A postcard with a single move on it, mailed back and forth. A game taking months. We've played hundreds of games like that across 50 years. And chess, real chess, teaches you a thing that turned out to be the only weapon I had left after the stroke, which is that the strongest move on the board is very often the quietest one. There's a move called castling. When your king is in danger, you don't charge out swinging. You make one small, quiet, almost invisible move that tucks your king into safety and brings your defense into the open where it can work. And your opponent, so focused on his own attack, so sure he's winning, very often doesn't even notice you've done it until it's far too late. Remember that word, castling. It's the whole story. I keep the king from that old set on the table by my chair, a worn wooden king, and I held it a great deal in the months I'm about to describe. You'll understand why. Cora and I had a good long marriage and one daughter, Meg, who grew up smart and kind and moved away for her work, to Colorado, the way good kids do. And we were proud of her for going, even though the house got quiet when she did. We were not rich people, but we were careful people. And after 40 years of an engineer's salary and Cora's bookkeeping, we had the house paid off and a decent amount set aside. Enough that I never thought about money, which is its own kind of wealth. And then, about 2 years ago, everything came apart at once. the way it sometimes does at the end of a life, like a structure that holds for decades and then loses every margin in a single season. Cora got sick, fast, the bad kind. And while I was caring for her, lifting her, sitting up with her, the strain and my own bad heart caught up with me. And one morning the right side of the world went numb and the floor came up to meet me. And that was the stroke. I spent weeks in a rehabilitation hospital learning to do, badly, with my left hand, the things my right hand had done without a thought for 70 years. And while I was in there, learning to hold a spoon again like a child, Cora died. In a different building, and I was not there. And I will carry that the rest of my days. So I came home from rehab to a house with no Cora in it, and a body that no longer answered when I called it. No wife, no right hand, no clear voice. The phone too heavy to manage, the stairs a cliff, the car keys a cruel joke on the hook by the door. And that exact man, right there, the grieving widower newly in a wheelchair, alone in a paid-off house, is the precise thing the Lornas of this world go hunting for. They can smell it from across a county. A man who is isolated and dependent and gutted by grief, who has money he can no longer guard, and who, because his mouth has gone slow, everyone has quietly agreed to treat as already half gone. On paper, I was the most perfect mark a predator could draw up, and I sat there in my grief with no idea at all that a hunt had already begun, and that the hunter was about to be hired, with my daughter's love and my daughter's money, to move into my spare room. I want to tell you about the thing that happened to me after the stroke that has nothing to do with money, because it's the soil everything grew in. People stopped talking to me. They started talking about me, in front of me. Because my speech came slow and slurred and my face didn't move right, people, good people, kind people, decided that the man inside was as broken as the voice coming out, and they began to address whoever was pushing my chair instead of me. Does he want to sit by the window? How is he doing today? He, while I'm right there. Do you have any idea what that does to a man? To become a he in his own presence. To sit fully awake and fully yourself inside a body that the whole world has started treating as an empty house. I was as sharp as I was the day I retired. Sharper, maybe. Because I now had nothing to do all day, every day, but sit and think. And a mind with nothing to do gets very strong and very fast, like a muscle worked to exhaustion. I could still run a load calculation in my head for the pure pleasure of it. I remembered every bridge I'd ever designed, every name of every grandchild, the whole of my life, perfectly. And not one single person could see any of it, because all of it was locked behind a mouth that had gone slow and a face that had gone still. Imagine being buried alive, except the coffin is your own body and the dirt is other people's assumptions. And you can hear them up there, talking about you, deciding things about you, and you cannot make them hear that you are awake. That is the loneliness of being present and erased at the very same time, and it was, by a wide margin, the worst thing the stroke ever did to me. Worse than the chair, worse than the silence, worse than anything Lorna would later take. And it was about to become, though I had no idea yet, the exact unlocked crack that Lorna would slip through. Because a person who is completely certain there is no one home does not bother to lock the door, or lower her voice, or watch what she does in front of the furniture. Lorna came about 4 months after I got home. My daughter Meg, frantic with worry from 1,000 miles away, had arranged for a home aide, a private one, well recommended, to come daily and then to live in, to cook and clean and help me with the things my body couldn't do anymore. And on the surface, Lorna was good at it. She was strong, efficient, warm enough. She got me up and dressed. She made decent meals. She kept the house. For a few weeks, I was even grateful. And then, slowly, the way these things always go, slowly enough that there was never one single moment you could point to and say, "There." That was when it turned. Lorna began to close the doors of my life one at a time. It started with the phone. Meg would call from Colorado, and more it was Lorna who reached it first. And I would hear her in the kitchen, warm and sorrowful, saying, "Oh, he's resting right now, honey. Or he had a rough night. Let me have him call you tomorrow when he's stronger." And then tomorrow would come, and she would tell me, casually, that Meg had just called to check in. Nothing important. Didn't want to tire me. She set herself up as the translator between my daughter and me, and what she translated, in both directions, was distance. To Meg, 1,000 miles away and sick with guilt already, she painted a father who was fading, confused, easily upset, who found phone calls exhausting and visits worse. To me, she let drop, gently, with a sad little shake of her head, that Meg seemed so busy out there with her own life that it was hard for the young ones to find the time, that it was a shame, really, how children forget. Drop by drop by drop. She was pouring poison into a 40-year love between a father and his only child. And she was doing it so slowly and so kindly that neither of us could feel it happening. The old friends who phoned got the same treatment. "He's not really up to talking today." The neighbor who knocked got met at the door. "Oh, he's having a hard day. Maybe next week." Within a couple of months, the wide, warm world of a man who'd lived in one town for 40 years had been narrowed down to a single room and a single person. And that person was the one robbing me. That is not a side effect of the theft. That is the theft. The isolation comes first, always. Because a man no one is talking to is a man no one can be warned by. Because by then she had started on the money. And she did it right in front of me. Which is the part I most need you to feel. She had gotten herself put on my accounts, you see. It happened in the fog of those first months. Papers a confused, grieving man signs because the helpful person says they're necessary for paying the bills. And once she was on the accounts and had a power of attorney I barely remembered granting, she had the keys to everything. And because she was completely certain I couldn't follow it, she stopped hiding it. She'd sit at my kitchen table, 6 feet from my chair, and make calls. I heard her move money. I heard her talk to someone, a boyfriend, I think, about the house, about how the old man wouldn't last forever, and the property alone was worth a fortune. I heard her arrange a withdrawal, and laugh, and say he won't even know. He doesn't know what day it is. I sat in my chair, clear as a bell, and listened to a woman plan the theft of my entire life. In my own kitchen. In a voice she didn't bother to lower, because she had looked at my slow mouth and my still hand and decided there was no one in here to hear her. That was her mistake. That was the whole game, right there. She talked about robbing me as if I weren't in the room, and I was in the room, and I have a very, very good memory. Now here is the problem I faced, and I want you to sit in it with me for a moment, because it's a problem most people never have to imagine. I knew exactly what was happening. I had the whole structure of her scheme mapped in my head, every beam and joint of it, and I could do nothing. I couldn't drive to the bank where she was now a signer. I couldn't get to a lawyer. I couldn't even use my own telephone, because she was almost always in the house. And on the rare occasion I tried, my slow hands and slower speech meant that by the time I dialed and started to talk, she'd be there, gently taking the phone. "Oh, let me help you with that, Vern. Who are you trying to call?" I was a man who could see the bridge was going to collapse and could not get anyone to listen, because I was standing on the bridge, and my warnings came out as the slurred speech of a man everyone had agreed to stop hearing. My body, which had been my whole strength, was now her best accomplice. It held me in that chair as surely as a cage. So I did what an engineer does with an impossible load. I stopped trying to push against it directly. because direct force was exactly what I no longer had. And I looked instead for the one quiet path the force could travel that she wasn't watching. I castled. Here was the thing Lorna didn't think about. Because she'd stopped thinking of me as a person who did things. 2 channels into the outside world still ran through that house, and both of them ran straight past her, because both of them looked, to her, like the harmless habits of a vegetable. The first was the chess. Every week or two, a postcard came from Russ with his next move, and I would, with enormous effort, my left hand learning to do what my right no longer could, write my move on a card. And Lorna would cheerfully drop it in the outgoing mail, because what could be more harmless than an old man's chess game with some other old man across the country? She never read the cards. Why would she? They were just chess. And the second channel was a nurse. Because here is a thing the Lornas of the world cannot fully control. When you have a documented medical condition, the system sends people. A visiting nurse came every week, a sharp, kind, no-nonsense woman named Paula, sent by an agency, paid by the agency, beholden to Lorna for exactly nothing. Lorna hated it, but couldn't stop it, because the doctor ordered it. And every week, for a few minutes, Paula would take my blood pressure and check me over. And sometimes, Lorna would step out of the room to take a call or have a smoke. And for 90 seconds, I would be alone with a competent adult from the outside world who was looking right at me, not at the chair. It took me a long time to be ready, months, because I knew I would get exactly one shot at this, and a wasted shot might be a fatal one. And because doing it right meant 2 things the old me had never been rich in, and the stroke had handed me in abundance: certainty and patience. When you cannot move, you learn to wait. And when you have nothing to do but sit in a chair and watch, you learn to be very, very sure of what you've seen. So in the long, quiet nights, when Lorna was asleep and the house was mine again, I worked. It is a strange and humbling thing to relearn writing at 72, to coax block letters out of a left hand that had never held a pen for anything but holding down paper. And the first pages I made looked like a child's, but I kept at it, night after night, the way I'd once drilled a calculation until it was clean. And I copied out, in those painful, careful capitals, everything the witness in the chair had seen. The account she had bled white. The dates, which I had no calendar for but kept in my head and reconstructed from the light and the visiting nurse schedule. The withdrawal she had laughed about. The boyfriend's name. The conversation about my house, my Cora's house, and what it would be worth once the old man was gone. I had no recordings, no documents a courtroom would fall in love with. What I had was better, in the end. I had a sworn and certain witness who had been present, fully conscious for every move of the crime, and I wrote down, in my ruined hand, exactly what that witness knew, and on the chess cards to Russ. I began, one move at a time, to do a thing the 2 of us had never once done in 50 years of correspondence. Tucked into the margin beside the chess notation, just a few tiny words per card, never enough to alarm Lorna if she happened to glance before she mailed it. I started passing my oldest friend the truth, the way a prisoner taps on a pipe. Knight to F6, and under it, small. Russ, trouble here. Knight takes pawn, and under it, the aide, bad. Bishop C4, and under it, can't use the phone, don't call the house. And Russ, who had known me for half a century, who knew to his bones that I am a man who does not exaggerate and does not panic and does not, ever, ask for help he doesn't need, read between his pawns and understood that something had gone very wrong in a house 2,000 miles away. He did not call. He played his next move, and under it, small, he wrote, "Hold on, Vern, I'm coming around the board." And he began, on his end, quietly, to pull on the single thread I had managed to pass him. And then came the day with Paula, the move I'd been building toward for 2 months. I'll tell you the part where I nearly lost my nerve. Because the fear was real, and it was specific. The fear was this. What if I'm wrong about Paula? What if I hand this to her and she's the cautious type who mentions it to Lorna first? To be sure, the way people do. And then I am a slurring old man who has just accused his caregiver, alone in a house with her, with no phone and no legs and no way out, at the complete mercy of a woman who now knows I'm dangerous. That is a real fear. That is the fear that keeps 1,000 trapped people silent. I sat with the king in my hand the night before, and I ran the odds the way I'd run a stress calculation. Cold. And I decided that Paula's whole life, her training, her license, the fact that she was a mandated reporter, all of it loaded the odds my way. And that a man who waits for perfect certainty in a collapsing structure dies in the rubble being certain. So the next morning, when Paula came, and when Lorna, thank God, stepped out to the porch for her phone call, I did the bravest thing my broken body has ever done. I took the folded papers I'd hidden in the side of the chair, and I put them into Paula's hand. And I made my slow, ruined mouth say, as clearly as I have ever made it say anything, these words. I am not confused. Read this when you leave. Please help me. And I watched Paula's face change. I watched a competent woman look at a man she'd been treating, kindly but distantly, as a patient, and suddenly see a person in there, awake, terrified, and absolutely lucid. She didn't gasp or react when Lorna came back in. She was good. She just tucked the papers into her bag with her own forms, finished her visit, said her normal goodbyes, and left. And I sat in my chair, heart going like a hammer, knowing the king was now either safe or lost, and that it was out of my hands. It was safe, Paula, the moment she got to her car and unfolded those painful block-lettered pages. Did exactly what her training and her conscience demanded. She did not come back in to ask Lorna about it. She did not give the benefit of the doubt to the competent-seeming adult over the frightened patient, which is the mistake that gets so many trapped people killed, slowly. She drove to a parking lot, and she read every word. And then she called Adult Protective Services that same afternoon and made a formal report. A mandated report from a licensed nurse, which is a very different thing from a confused family rumor. A credible professional witness, a lucid patient who had stated plainly, I am not confused. And a written, dated account in the man's own ruined handwriting. That is not nothing. That is a crowbar under the door. And because Russ, 2,000 miles away, had spent those same patient weeks reading between the pawns and quietly doing his part, the two threads I'd been spinning in the dark finally found each other. Russ had been calling Meg, carefully, because I'd told him on a chess card, don't call the house. He'd reached my daughter on her own cell and told her that her father was not declining, her father was being held, and that the chess game they thought was just an old man's hobby had become, move by move, a distress signal. So when APS reached out to the family, Meg was already primed. For months, she'd been fed a slow diet of, your father is fading, don't upset him, he doesn't want to talk. And she'd half believed it. The way you believe the kind professional who's there when you can't be, and felt sick with guilt about it. And then, in the space of a single week, a visiting nurse and her father's oldest friend in the world told her the same impossible thing from two completely different directions. And the guilt turned into fury. And the fury bought a plane ticket. She was in Maine the next morning, and the machinery that exists for exactly this moment, the machinery Lorna had bet her whole scheme on me being too isolated and too slurred and too discredited to ever reach, all of it engaged at once, the way a thing does when the right small bolt is finally pulled. The state investigator opened a case. The bank, once flagged, looked at the pattern of withdrawals and froze the accounts. Meg sat down with a lawyer to tear up the power of attorney, that a grieving man had signed in a fog. It did not happen in one cinematic instant. It happened the way a real structure fails. All the little stresses I had been silently logging for months suddenly arriving at the same joint at the same time, and then the whole of her control letting go at once. I will tell you about the day it ended, because I had waited a long time for it, longer than I'd waited for anything, and it was not at all what I expected. I think I'd imagined, in the chair on the bad nights, some kind of confrontation, some moment where I would finally speak and be heard. It wasn't like that. It was quieter and stranger and, in a way, better. Meg arrived first, having flown all night, and she came through the door of my house and she crossed the room straight to my chair, and she got down on her knees in front of me and put her face against mine and said, "Dad, I'm here. I'm so sorry. I'm here." And for the first time in over a year, somebody was talking to me and not about me. And I am not ashamed to tell you that the engineer who'd held himself cold and calculating for all those months came apart, finally, in his daughter's arms. And then the others came, the investigator from the state. And there were calls to the bank and papers from the lawyer. And Lorna understood, within about an hour, watching all of it, that the ground had gone out from under her completely, that the accounts were frozen, that the power of attorney was being torn up, that the daughter she had so carefully kept 1,000 miles away by telephone was kneeling by my chair and was not going anywhere, and that the quiet, slurring, written-off old man in that chair had somehow, impossibly, from a wheelchair, without ever once touching a telephone she didn't control, reached the entire outside world and brought it down on her head. I watched her do the arithmetic at last, the exact sum she should have done on her very first day in my house, and was far too sure of herself to bother with. And then Lorna did the thing she had not done in all the long months she'd lived in my home, and robbed me. She looked at me, really looked, right into my eyes. For the first time, the way you look at a person and not a piece of furniture. And I looked back at her, steady, and I let her see that I was, and always had been, completely there. I watched her understand that every call she'd made 6 feet from my chair, I had heard and kept. That the boring chess cards she'd dropped in the mail without a glance had been my hand reaching out under the table the whole time. That the empty house she'd been so certain she was robbing had had a man wide awake inside it at every single moment, watching, remembering, and waiting. The look on her face in that instant, the dawning horror of a hunter who realizes the thing she'd tagged as carrion has been alert and patient and 10 moves ahead of her the entire time. That look was the only justice I ever truly needed. The courts gave me the rest, but that look, that was mine. And here is the human part, the part the rule of telling this true requires of me, because Lorna was not a cartoon. When it all came down, she didn't beg, and she didn't, in the end, even seem ashamed in the way you'd want. She got hard, and she said a thing I've thought about ever since. She said, "You people, your kids dump you on someone like me and fly back to Colorado and call it love. And I'm the one who wipes you and feeds you and sits here in this dead house. And I'm the criminal." She said it with a bitterness that had a terrible sliver of something real in it. Because the world does take people, often women, often poor, and pay them almost nothing to do the hardest, loneliest, most invisible work there is, caring for the dying and the broken, and then act surprised when some of them grow a cold callous over the place compassion used to be. I am not excusing her. She robbed a helpless man and tried to take his home and cut him off from his child, and that is evil. And she had done it before. I learned to others, but I understood, looking at her, that she was not a monster from nowhere. She was a person who had been hollowed out by something too, and had decided to do her hollowing out to the rest of us. And understanding that did not make me hate her. which I think was its own small mercy, mostly to me. Here is the last move, under the last move. When it was done, I had her cold, and the state had her, and because she'd done it to others, she faced real charges. And I did not lift one finger to soften that, because a predator who hunts the helpless will simply find new helpless people the moment she's free. And the only mercy that matters there is mercy to her next victim, who I will never meet, but whom I could protect by letting justice run. So I let it run, all the way. But I took no joy in her ruin, and I spent not one more hour of my short remaining life thinking about Lorna than I had to. Because the actual prize, the only thing I'd been playing for in that chair all those months, was not her punishment. It was my daughter, standing in my kitchen, finally seeing me. It was Meg moving back closer, and the wall of lies between us coming down brick by brick, and the two of us getting the months and years we'd nearly lost. It was being a person again, in my own home, in the eyes of the people I love. That was the king I was protecting the whole time, not the money. The money was just the thing Lorna was after. What I was castling to save was the chance to be fully alive, fully myself, fully seen, for whatever time I have left. And I saved it. I still play chess with Russ, by mail, one move per card, and I still keep that worn wooden king on the table by my chair, and I hold it sometimes, and I think about how a thing that looks finished, a thing the whole board has written off, can still, if there's a clear mind inside it and a little patience, make the one quiet move that changes everything. So here is what I'll leave you with tonight, wherever you're listening from, and I'm going to say it to two different people. If you have an older person in your life who has gotten frail, who has slowed down, whose voice or body has changed, hear me. Do not mistake the broken body for an empty house. The person is still in there, fully, achingly there. And the cruelest thing you can do, crueler even than what Lorna did, is to start talking about them instead of to them. To let them become a he in their own room. Keep talking to them. Keep looking them in the eye. Keep making the independent contact, the visit, the call that the new helpful stranger can't intercept. Because that contact is sometimes the only rope a trapped person has. And if you are that older person, if you are sitting in a body that has betrayed you while your mind stays sharp and the world treats you as gone, then hear this from a man in a wheelchair who beat the person who counted on him being gone. You are still in there. Your mind is still a weapon. And the quietest move, made patiently, by a person everyone has written off, is the most powerful move on the whole board. They will never see it coming. They are not even watching you. So Castle, if your body or your loved one's body has slowed, and you felt the world start to talk over you or them, tell me about it down in the comments, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read every single one, slowly, myself. If this was worth your time, subscribe, and go talk to the person everyone else is talking over. And remember that a clear mind in a still body is the most underestimated power there is.